Our podcast today is slightly different. We're speaking to a gentleman who used to work at the Nursing Midwifery Council as a data analyst, and he whistleblew during his time there because he raised various concerns around the way that data was being handled. And this is important to us at NMC Watch because quite often we see issues with data protection and the way that data is dealt with at the NMC, which is less than satisfactory. So it was interesting to speak to this man and get his perspective on how it was working for the NMC, what events led up to his whistleblowing, and how he was treated following that whistleblowing. So I hope you enjoy it. If you need support, please contact us, nmcwatch.org.uk. See you soon. So, welcome to our podcast. We're joined here by John, and we're very pleased that he's with us. John is here under a different name, just to try and protect his anonymity a little bit. And we're very grateful that he's joined us to just talk about his experience with the NMC. Obviously, a lot of the podcasts that we've had, we talk to people that are going through fitness to practice and get their experience of being with the NMC through that process. So it's always interesting to hear from somebody that's actually been on the other side and worked for the NMC, which John has. And we can sort of hear his experience of the issues that he had. And I think hopefully you'll find that really interesting. So welcome. And you worked for them from December 2022, didn't you, to about August 23, yeah?
Yes.
Your probation was terminated after you raised a series of concerns of issues that you'd seen when you were working during that short space of time. And like many of our group, you didn't actually realise at the time that you'd whistleblown, had you? You were just doing your job and raising issues.
Yeah, I'd started raising issues, almost from the second or third week, saying things aren't right here. These were just, I'm not happy about this. That's not the right phrase. I'm worried about this. How can I produce reports with this data? But I kept it quiet because I kept it very low key. I was trying to not stir up trouble, trying to get things fixed in the background, or just assuming that things would be fixed.
Yes.
But nothing went anywhere. So
and before you worked for the NMC, where were you working? What sort of work were you doing before the NMC?
Well, I'd had a big gap of about 3.5 years before the NMC, which they knew about. And this was due to a number of things, including COVID.
Yeah.
Which really hit. But before that, I was a mixture of a contract and a permanent database programmer or general back-end programmer.
Okay. And just for people like me that are quite IT illiterate, what does that role involve when you're at the NMC? What was your role?
Well, supposedly they were very interested in my database experience, and they seemed to want that. But when it came down to it, they just dumped me in front of a database and said, write reports, which is okay. It's what I've done a lot of. It's not a complicated thing, writing reports, if you've got decent data. So yeah, I was, basically that.
Okay. And what kind of interested you to work for the NMC, or was it just a role that just came up that you were used to doing? And was there anything particular?
Well, because of the state of the market at the time, I was having trouble finding work. And when the NMC showed an interest in me, I was very pleased. It certainly wasn't equivalent to the kind of pay that I had before, but pay has never been of great interest to me. And I was glad to get the job. And as I'd always worked in commercial companies before, the chance to actually give something back actually counted a lot. So I was pleased that I could do that as well. So all in all, that, I was quite pleased at the time.
And did you understand what the NMC's role was, what they were there for? Did you appreciate what they were there for?
As a regulator, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. So moving on to handling the sort of summary of the concerns that you raised. So why were they important? What about practice? Why were they so important to raise? What was the impact of the issues you were raising?
Well, the impact was very difficult to state because if you've got bad data or problematic data or other problems, you can pretty well guarantee the output is not going to be good.
Yeah.
Unless you can't say how it's affected, unless you go back, fix all the problems, rerun the reports, and then compare them to have a known good report. There's no way I could do that because it just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
So we were left with reports produced from data that was problematic, that was stored properly, that was known to be bad in places. Mm-hmm. In some cases, it's just incredibly, we couldn't even tell if data was good or bad, which sounds hard to believe, but
right.
Come across anything like that before.
Right.
So my concern, if I'd been able to say this is not working here, the Professional Standards Authority would have been down on them hard and fast, but I couldn't do that because I didn't. It just, garbage in, garbage out, but I can't tell you what's affected.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, we know just how important data is from our profession, to be able to give, good information about what's going well, what's not going well. And obviously a lot of the reports that come, the annual report, for example, that comes out from the NMC, that's all about, how many people have, on the register and how many people are referred and all those things. So obviously we're quite confident when that information comes out that it's accurate, and it's important that it's accurate. So really interesting what you're saying about that. So
I would like to clarify something. Yeah. It's likely that most of the data was correct.
Yes.
The great majority of it, but the fact that any was allowed in at all when databases and practices can make it so easy to get the data right was a major concern.
Are you able to give any kind of, just in layman's terms, any basic example without breaching anything, but just so that people can understand the real importance of it?
No, I definitely can. I can give quite a lot actually, but
go for it.
Well, internally, each nurse will have a PIN. That's their public ID.
Yeah.
But behind the scenes, each person has a PRN, and that's supposed to be unique to them. And that's the data that we worked on. Now, if the PRN is supposed to be there, full stop, and it's supposed to be a number. If we have if a nurse's PRN is blank, that shouldn't happen. If a nurse's PRN happens to contain, believe it or not, a name, rather than a number, something has definitely gone wrong. And that example, I think, was there when I started and there when I finished. And it's with databases aren't, mainly that complicated. People see IT as some kind of wizardry. It's not. It's really just boring, straightforward stuff. Databases can check for this easily if you tell it to, but they didn't even do that, which is the most basic stuff. It's just incredible.
So this makes sense to me because we have a lot of members of our group who say that they've been sent the wrong details of people. They've been sent somebody else's file, for example, or the information that they've been given for many months isn't making it to, or isn't then being put back out, or they're losing data. So this kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And I know the NMC have been saying for some time that they need to invest in new IT systems so that their data collection is better, etc. So that would kind of make sense because I'm shocked at how frequently sort of GDPR breaches and things happen. So I guess what you're saying there is quite understandable why that's been happening if something so basic's not right.
it would contribute. It sounds more like it's a procedural failure than a data failure, most of it. But of course, I can't tell. But something is going wrong. And if the data is not stored properly, then it indicates that it's a symptom of a larger problem.
Yeah, yeah.
If they can't do a simple thing properly, then how can they do anything more complex?
Quite, quite. So you generally try to raise the concerns as you would in any role, part of your role, isn't it, to say, well, this isn't working, this is working. So what was the process for that? Was it just generally not listened to, or was it that you were poo-pooed, you were told, oh, don't worry, it's not important? How was it initially dealt with?
I had effectively two managers there, my line manager and the guy above him.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I sent reports, they were just not listened to.
Okay.
Whenever I raised this with my line manager, he just wasn't interested. When I raised it with the manager above, who also managed me for a time, I mean, I sent him, at his request, I did large reports about potential errors in the data.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. Nothing happened. He never discussed it. Nothing got done that I could ever see.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And did you have like I mean, in nursing, we have like incident logs, and we raise a DATEX, for example, which is a report to say that we've logged something. Was there any mechanism to do that, or was it literally just escalating to another person?
There were no logs. There was no formal way of reporting these things.
Okay.
It
Okay.
was
So it was all verbal, basically.
well, email, but nothing happened. There should have been. The idea of having a formal log would be, yes, that would be the equivalent of having.
Yeah.
We should have had it. We didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And risk registers and things like that, was that ever mentioned?
I only found out that the NMC had a risk register afterwards, and no, I can't say anything about the risk register.
Okay, okay. So you started raising informally as you would, and that wasn't going anywhere. So what was the next steps? What did you do next?
Well, I kept raising them on the assumption that people would listen, and then finally, things became bad in my own experience. So what happened right at the end of August was that I raised a formal grievance against my manager, my line manager, also mixed in with a lot of the complaints about the management of the data. Now, these two were mixed together because I'd never whistleblown before. I didn't know I was whistleblowing.
Yeah.
So these were not clearly separated out, my personal grievances, which I'm not going to here, and my concerns about the data. Right. So they all went in together in one big document.
Right. And then what happened next once you'd raised that grievance?
What happened next? They started delaying, and they delayed the first investigation as far as they could. I had to really push them. But when the investigation came back, it was so unbelievably bad that I thought something had gone wrong.
Okay.
It ignored just about every part of my personal grievance. Again, I'm not going to go into that because it's not relevant.
No, absolutely.
It denied all my other concerns about the data management, or just when I was concerned about another of my colleagues being worked far too hard for too long, costing him his health. Me and another person were getting seriously concerned about this. Yeah. None of that. This had been in the past, but I raised it before. Anyway, I raised that formally. That was ignored.
Okay.
So then there was I rejected that first investigation loudly. And then the second investigation came in and just supported the first investigation. At that point, I realized it was deliberate, because I thought that somebody had just really messed up, and, the NMC is fair and kind and decent. And
So was
and
the investigation done by somebody internally, or was it done by external people?
it was internal.
Yeah. Okay.
So at that point, I realised that this wasn't a mistake, and it was beyond belief.
Yeah. That must
The
have been
end.
shocking for you to realise that.
Yeah, I'm a bit naive,
Aren't
but
we
yeah,
all?
yeah, it was. I mean, the worst thing was I said, I made it clear to them the nurse's data has to come first. This,
Yeah.
um, they just didn't care, or they didn't want to know, and that's when they started doing what I found out later from you and others was their standard procedure of trying to wear you down.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so that sort of leads me on to the next thing. Obviously, the two investigations, neither of which were complete or accurate as far as you were concerned. So what was the next? I mean, we laugh a little bit with organisations like Whistleblowers UK that there's almost like a standard textbook of how organisations, and this isn't just unique to the NMC, it's across all sectors, whether in health, police, law, teaching, whatever, there seems to be a standard way of dealing with whistleblowers, which is tell them that they're wrong in what they're raising, gaslight them to make them believe that they're making it up or having some sort of episode, which means that they're inaccurate in their remembering of things. And if that doesn't work, then bully them and harass them and try and make them feel that the only option is to leave. So I hoped to goodness that wasn't the case for you, but I suspect it probably was. What was the next thing that happened?
Well, towards the end of my time, while I was there, before I put in the grievance, I seemed to be being made to fail my probation,
Okay.
which I didn't understand at the time. Perhaps I'm overstating it, being made to fail my probation, but what it felt like at the time was nobody was going to talk to me.
Right.
And for example, we had known problems with the database's performance. I could probably have fixed that. I was the best person qualified to do so by far in the company. I offered, they acknowledged, they never came back to me. I was supposed to give training to a group of people regarding databases.
Yeah.
They never got back to me. I was supposed to train other people in Python. They never got back to me.
Okay.
I did work.
It's
Nobody got back to me.
almost like sending you to Coventry, almost as you'd have in the school playground, ignoring you and.
Well, yes, but I mean, at the time, I was thinking it was my fault, and I didn't. I was thinking it was something that was wrong with me.
Yeah.
It was only after I'd left that I came across the phrase "someone being ghosted," and
Yeah.
suddenly everything clicked into place. And I thought, that's how it felt. I'd been, but at the time, I just didn't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I still don't understand why, because I felt that I had a great deal to offer.
Mm.
And I had the skills, they needed those skills.
Yeah.
It seemed like a win-win,
Yes.
but they turned it into a lose-lose, and very odd.
Yeah. Are you all right to carry on?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the next option for you, did you leave or did you just not complete your probation?
Um, well, shortly after I put in my grievance, my final probation section was probation review was done, and at that point, whatever I put in front of them, they at the meeting, and I had an awful lot in writing. I'll just go back briefly. You said talking about people denying facts. I had so much in writing that they couldn't deny it, but they tried. So they just said, you failed your probation, you failed this, you failed that, you failed to provide the training. Hang on, nobody came back to me on the training.
Right. Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they said you failed. They're partly right. There was something I should have done in my probation. I'm completely free to admit that I didn't, about
Yeah.
One part of it I didn't complete,
Yeah.
but the rest they wanted me out, and that was it.
But a compassionate employer would, recognize that and put things in place to say, well, you haven't managed to achieve this. What can we put in place to help you achieve it? And you have done really well in this sort of thing. So it seemed, I mean, we've all been there. Those of us who've whistleblown, we recognize those behaviors, sadly. So,
Mm.
okay. So in their eyes, you failed your probationary. So that meant that you had to leave. And obviously you've been there less than 2 years. So
No rights.
there
Yes.
weren't any rights. Did you have it? Were you in a union or anything? Does your role involve a union at all?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. So you didn't have any support throughout that period. Okay. Did they offer you any support at all? Did they offer you a mediator or anything?
Um, no, there was. I don't recall any mediation. The
Mm,
best they could do to support me was to say to sign into their or to use their mental health app or something like that. And I was just thinking, well,
mm.
this doesn't, what is this? They were making sympathetic noises, but behind the scenes, they were as hard as nails.
Okay. Okay. So sorry to hear that. So the next option was it employment tribunal next, or had you sort of decided to just put it behind you and move on? What was your thought process next?
I raised it with uh, ACAS. I can't remember. I can't remember the details because it's well over a year ago now. But
Don't worry.
we went to a tribunal.
Yeah.
I put it forward as a tribunal, and uh, it went from there.
Okay. And how was the tribunal not going into too much detail, but how was the tribunal experience? Was it similar? Was it fair? How did you find it?
Well,
I mean, obviously you're there on your own, I assume, or did you have a lawyer with you?
I couldn't afford a lawyer,
No.
so I had to represent myself, which was not a good move.
No.
So what happened um, is the NMC destroyed some data. They admitted it in writing. They
Okay.
wouldn't fill my SAR. They provided the data incomplete. I have a belief that they removed stuff from it, but they never acknowledged that.
Okay. So you did a subject access request to get your information and you didn't get that back. Is that correct?
I got it. I got a lot of stuff back in the wrong format, in an inconvenient format, which they thought I couldn't process, but I could because I've got IT
Okay. Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff, the Teams chat was simply destroyed, and they put it in writing. They said they didn't feel it was needed, so it was destroyed after 30 days. That's absolute garbage.
Okay.
And I'm sure that there was stuff missing. I know there was stuff missing from the emails they provided. And when I asked them on their policy on redaction or omission, they just never answered.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And this is really, we say to all of our members, particularly when they've been through an employment issue before going to the NMC, do a subject access request because that can really, and for those people listening don't understand what that is, that's, an organization holds all your data and you are eligible to request that and get all of that data back, including emails, text messages, WhatsApp messages,
yeah,
everything, basically, telephone conversations. But obviously, you're in the hands of the person that's providing them. And if you've had conflict with that person, it's not, or that organization, it's not really in their interest to provide you with information that might help you, particularly win an employment tribunal. And doesn't really seem to be governed at all. There's nobody you can, I mean, you can go to the ICO, can't you, if you feel that it hasn't been processed properly. But it's really difficult, isn't it? And particularly if you're in, I know where I was when I tried to do it, you're not in the strongest mental health space to be able
no,
to challenge and unpick. And like you say, you haven't got a lawyer that can do that for you. So it's really unacceptable, isn't it?
it is. And the ICO were pretty lame. They took forever to get to look into they eventually told me they've upheld my my complaint against the NMC, but they haven't even published it yet. It took over a year for them to do it.
Wow.
When I formally whistleblew to the ICO,
Yeah.
they won't tell me anything at all. They won't give me any information. So the
But
ICO,
they have upheld your complaint.
that's what they told me, but they haven't published anything yet.
Okay.
But going back to the tribunal, I mean, the NMC is supposed to disclose documents, all relevant documents. So I said, you knew that this was whistleblowing, or I believe you knew this was whistleblowing. How did you look into this, the issues of the data? They sent me back 5 or 6 emails containing absolutely nothing. And that is not how a hidebound bureaucracy like the NMC operates. They will have documented everything. So either they didn't, well, they did. They looked into it. And the team, I found out later from another SAR that there was a team that looked into it, but I got absolutely no documentation. And for the tribunal.
Right.
And that was really crucial. So what can you do? The NMC portrayed me in some really unpleasant ways. That didn't go down well because I had everything in writing to counter that.
Right. They
didn't follow their own investigation procedures. You feel like you're screwed.
Yeah, and I'm knowing and observing NMC barristers and lawyers and in all sorts of scenarios, my own experience with fitness to practice, and then seeing other registrants and going to the High Court. They do their job very well, which is to defend the NMC. That's what they're there for. But it can be quite brutal, can't it? And it can be quite a personal attack, really. I don't know whether that's how you experienced it when it was at your employment tribunal.
Well, the personal stuff was pretty unpleasant, but I could rebut all that. Yeah. It was almost funny in the end. But the dishonesty of destroying data, which could have provided evidence, I believe, had evidence that one of my work colleagues was being bullied into working far, far excessively. The fact that I have no doubt there were documents about a lot of documentation about my concerns about the data. Yeah. They didn't provide that. That's just dishonest. I mean, it's actually illegal, is my understanding, but they did it. Yeah. They withheld it. And
this is reminiscent of, James Titchcombe unveiled a similar thing, didn't he, when he had a huge amount of money spent on redacting communications between him and the NMC. And that all took years and years and years for that to come out. But it was, there was supposed to be lessons learned and, big apologies, etc., etc. But then this shows us that actually this seems to be something that is just done and not changed, which is really sad to hear, really sad to hear.
Well, lessons learned. It was only after I'd been booted out of the NMC that I started to discover. I got in contact with, I think, you and somebody else, and all this stuff came pouring out. I had no idea behind the scenes what had been going on for so long. Yeah. I just didn't know.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It isolates you, so you think, that's why it has power, because it isolates you. You think you're the only one going through it, and that's why I'm so dedicated to making sure NMC Watch keeps going, because it's about getting people together and making you realize that you're not on your own, and it's not only you that's experienced it. Your situation might be unique, might be different, but there'll be a lot of similar themes with the way that you've been treated and experienced it. So did the NMC try to, because obviously going to employment tribunal isn't great, and it costs quite a lot of money, and did they ever try to resolve this out of court at all? Did they try and?
Yes, during the preceding the tribunal, they made they were interested in what's the word?
Settlement, or?
Thank you. Settling for a financial sum.
Okay.
And at that point, I was really angry. It was about the nurses' data. They were trying to buy me off, and I told them to shove it. I've got the email. which tells them that the nurse's data comes first, then my colleagues, then me, in that order.
Yeah.
So they said they didn't take that up.
Okay.
So they understood that that was a rejection of what they were offering.
Okay, so and did was the tribunal judge aware of that, or is that something you're not allowed to disclose to a ET?
That was without prejudice, so that couldn't be disclosed. Although I did use that as a hammer against the lawyers, so they carefully didn't ask certain questions, which would have led to me saying, "Do you wish to disclose this?"
Right.
But anyway, further after that,
very well considering you weren't represented. It really does sound like you were, you managed that situation very well, I have to say. Anyway, go on.
Well, there was a further settlement. After that, I spoke to somebody who said, look, the tribunal can only offer a financial settlement. They can't force, unlike ACAST, they can't do anything about the data management issue. So at this point, why not settle? Because you're going to tribunal. Even if you win, you cannot force them to fix the data. Right. So that seemed like a rational thing, and I was very tired.
Yeah.
So I said to the NMC, okay, I'm willing to talk. And they said, financial settlement. Going back over that, approached them, I think, in March and said, okay, I'm interested in settling.
Yes.
They said, no, thanks.
Okay. So having previously wanted to settle, but you saying no because they weren't prioritizing what you need to prioritize, you then went back having been exhausted and wanting to just get an end to it all, and they at that point didn't want to settle. Okay. Yeah. So it went to the employment tribunal. Briefly, what happened with that? What was the outcome of that?
I lost.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some puzzling things there, but basically they said the judge ruled, I think, correctly, that my probation had been finished because I didn't fulfil the requirements.
Right.
He seemed to be quite sympathetic. He understood that I hadn't been able to, but in law, that's not the point. I didn't fulfil them. So he ruled that I hadn't lost my job because of whistleblowing. And there is some confusion about the next bit, which is he said I hadn't whistleblown either, which is curious.
Okay.
I don't know if I should say this, but in the meeting, I won't say this. He judged that I hadn't whistleblown either, which I am very suspicious of because something doesn't add up there.
Okay. Because as we know, and something that the Whistleblowers UK are desperately trying to resolve is, you don't have to go down the protected disclosure route and official whistleblowing policy to be a whistleblower. It's more nuanced than that, and it should be recognised as such, but unfortunately isn't, and that's really, really big issue. Okay, so obviously all of this must have severely affected your mental health and how you coped with the resilience of it all. It must have been horrendous. By the end of the ET, how were you coping? How were you in yourself?
I wasn't coping. I'd running on empty.
Yeah.
Been for a long while.
Yeah.
And when I lost,
don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's fine.
That's all right. I want to say this because this is about the personal cost of what I went through, and this is what matters. I mean, the data management side worries me, but what other people are going through is the personal cost, and that is significant. So, in summary, I won't go into too much detail, but I ended up in hospital for 2 weeks, followed by 8 weeks in psychiatric wards, which was very much a first for me.
Yeah.
And a shock, but I was basically emptied out. The NMC completely wrecked me.
Yeah.
I have always been highly motivated. At this point now, I can't face work. I
Okay.
can't face much. I'm barely coping now. I used to love my work. I can't even think about work. I have a significant personal project which I can't even think about opening up and going back to. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
Um,
And do you put that down to everything you went through with the job at the NMC? Do you think it was a catalyst that it's different,
Catalyst is a good word, although perhaps not.
or a bomb?
It was a bomb.
Yeah.
I've got enough problems in my life to deal with, and but I can deal with them.
Yeah.
Not nice, but I can deal with them. But what the NMC did just pushed me well over the edge of the cliff. It
Mm.
was
Yeah. No, I understand. I understand. And I'm so grateful that you've even been able to get to the point to speak to us like this, because it's I was very aware of how difficult this has all been for you. And I know we've spoken a lot and you've been
yeah,
determined to want to get your voice heard. And it's been really
yeah,
difficult to get that to happen. So I don't
yeah.
want to cause you any more distress by asking
No,
more about it.
don't
But
worry about that. I'm happy to talk about it as long as it can be
yeah,
put to good use in the sense of supporting other people.
absolutely. I mean, everything you're saying is exactly what certainly people in our group are experiencing, what I experience, that complete devastation of your personal and professional life. And it just doesn't need to be like that, does it? It doesn't need to be like that.
It
It's
doesn't.
not to have to
That's what,
crush somebody is not what we're supposed to be, particularly for a regulator that's dealing with, a profession that's supposed to be about advocacy and caring for people. Um,
they were
yeah,
so full of fair and kind
yeah.
and what's funny is the Rise report was actually published about 6 weeks before my tribunal. Nothing, and they were so full of apologies and how things are going to change.
Yeah, and yet that's how they behave with you. Yeah, again, it's just it shows a deep-seated kind of cultural effort, doesn't it? That is going to need a lot of somebody very strong to unpick.
I don't know if the
Okay,
NMC can be unpicked. I think it's just such a ossified, solidified mess that, well, at least the top layer should be taken off completely.
mm. Do you think it's a particular people thing, that if certain people weren't there, that it would at least start to improve, or do you think it's just because they can, they behave like it because they can, or is it that they're not regulated properly themselves? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not in a position to say.
Well,
Um, I would say that the people, the top people, the CIO, I mean, he didn't seem to have any idea what he was doing.
okay,
Um, he denied us very simple, very basic programming tools like version control, which allows you to track changes,
yeah,
have a central place for everything. He must have known about the lack of documentation. We didn't, that's a mega issue. We had huge sprawling database collection and virtually no documentation on any of it.
no tracking, if you like, of
Well, there's no
control.
documentation. And what there was in terms of program management, we couldn't even compare two text files together to see differences, which is useful if you want to review code before it goes into the database. We
Right,
weren't even allowed that. It's beyond belief.
okay,
We had version control in the NMC. We just weren't allowed. We weren't allowed access to it. It's it's,
bizarre. Even I, with my lack of IT knowledge, can get why that's important.
it's
Yeah,
essential. It's
yeah,
essential.
yeah.
So he didn't think. When I raised that with him, he said, after a talk about AI and how might be using AI, he told me we might get. I said to him, okay, AI is great, but what about version control, basic stuff like that? he said we might get it in 2025, and that was him telling me in 2023.
Okay.
So what on earth?
Yeah.
This was costing us time.
Yes.
Anyway, this is the technical side. So again, this is getting a bit technical, and I realise you don't want to go down that.
No, that's fine. So in an ideal world, what needs to improve in the NMC? Can they realistically change? Can they manage this? Can they make improvements?
In their current structure, I think it's blatantly obvious that they can't.
Right.
They've had what seem to be inept leaders since reports started. The earliest reports I know of about problems at the NMC are in 2008, and yet, this has been allowed to continue. I do not believe they can change without taking off a lot of the management at the top. They just seem to support each other in producing colourful reports that don't say anything useful. Yeah. Flashy PowerPoint reports with smiling nurses on them that don't actually show anything.
Yeah, anything concrete. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. The comment that I hear from a lot of members of the public, particularly, and people that aren't involved in nursing or healthcare, when I was talking about my experience with the NMC, and the things that led, they'll tell people, well, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just leave, get another job? Why'd you care? Why was it so important to, continue on this path that clearly destroyed you? What would you kind of say to that?
Well, partly I'm a bit dumb.
No, you're not.
But partly I was failing there badly, but the way I was looking at it is, this seems to be me. And I'm happy to walk away from a failure if I can learn from it. But here it's just something's wrong with me. And I just kept on bullying forwards, trying to fix things without being smart enough to realize that I couldn't.
Yeah.
At times I'm not very bright.
I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think you're extremely bright. I think it's, about wanting to do the right thing, isn't it? And like you said, it was the nurses' data was what was more important than
Yes.
about yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, going back to your question about improving the NMC, I just want to re-emphasize that, okay, two things. First of all, the management of the data is not complicated. 95% of the time, it's really straightforward. For the last 5%, you might get someone like me in to do the, whatever. But most of it isn't. That and common sense would really have cured all this, all the data. But the fact that they allowed it to get into that state was worrying. But that's a sign of something larger in the NMC. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the NMC's been allowed to get into a state where they've got the RISE report and the forthcoming Omambala report and the other reports, that's a sign that there's a failure outside the NMC to manage the organisations. This is not a database problem. This is a systemic problem that's cultural rather than technical, and it extends upwards a long way. I don't understand why Wes Streeting doesn't seem to be, he doesn't seem to be interested. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it ultimately lands on his head.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Absolutely. For anybody going through, God forbid, what you went through, what would you give them any advice? Would you give them any advice on what to do differently? What else they should do? If there was somebody working there at the moment that was struggling to raise concerns, would you give them any advice? $1 million question, I know.
It's very difficult to answer.
If you were back there, what would you have done differently, do you think? Apart from not work there.
Well, I would have formally whistleblown.
Yeah.
I would have removed my personal grievance and made it a formal issue about the data, a formal whistleblower about the data.
Right.
Just having somebody to talk to, which I didn't have, just not, to talk to about this. Anybody would have helped me think it through. Having a lawyer would have been a good thing if you can afford it. Yeah. But if I'd gone through the same thing, I'd have done the same thing again, because it would have been the right thing to do to try and get the mess sorted. Mm. But the cost has been catastrophic for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, and I'm sure it will have helped so many people who will be listening to this and be able to see their stories and what you're saying, and hopefully somebody, you never know, maybe Wes Streeting will listen. But hopefully somebody will listen and say, look, this is, like you say, it's a systemic problem, and it's a inherent problem that needs a lot of work to unpick if the motivation is there to do it. So thank you so much, John, and you take care, and we're here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and you've been supportive of me. Please keep up the good work for everyone.
Well, thank you. Take care.